Tonight's panel, a bunch of shining stars from the localization world, and I'm going to turn this over to Ava Gross right now to introduce everybody. Thank you.
Okay, thanks everybody for coming. I apologize in advance, I have a cold, so if I sound a little bit funny, that's why. And first, Catella's going to talk about logistics where bathrooms are.
Okay, bathrooms. When you came to the lobby, the bathroom is on the right-hand side, and well, left if you're here. And then you see doors and it says boxes only, so please don't go through these doors. You haven't been signed in our system, so please make sure that you stay within this area and the restroom areas. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. And we're going to go around and introduce ourselves, so Mark, would you like to start?
Sure. Hey, my name's Mark Bolmer. I'm originally from the UK, so I've been across here for a few years. I've kind of worked in globalization at both large companies and small companies, working for Yahoo, but also in some of the smaller teams such as Yahoo Answers, which is a much more scrappier startup based out of Europe, and for Flickr. Currently I'm working for Ask.com and also working with some smaller startups and taking their first steps globally.
Thank you.
I'm Ketal, I'm localization manager here at Box. I've been in localization business for longer than I care to say. And I started as a translator. I spent a lot of time on the vendor side, and then I moved, I was at Yahoo. And then I came here where I started in the job of localization. Really, there was nobody really doing that dedicated to this resource at the time. So that's it.
Hi everybody, my name is Catherine Porter. I lead international strategy for OpenTable. And I'm a bit of a square peg tonight. I don't really have a localization background. I do have 13 of my 15 years of working have been in international roles. And really more on the international business, international strategy side. I'm certainly partnered with localization and expansion for many years. So before OpenTable, I was the person responsible for launching LinkedIn in Japan, and then I moved to Tokyo to lead LinkedIn over in Japan for a few years and got that off the ground. And then before that, I had international roles at Oracle and Google. So good to be here tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm Ava Gross, and I'm the localization manager at Life Career in San Francisco, and have helped Life Career launch the localization efforts from the start being September. Basically, one thing I want to mention, one thing everyone here has in common is that we all come from larger companies and have gone to smaller companies or startups. Also, the other thing is this is a repeat event, so the first time we had this event was actually in San Francisco at Life Career in December. Hopefully since then we've been able to refine our questions a bit and think what people would like to hear. So just to talk a little bit about the format tonight. The format is going to be that I'm going to be posing questions that we've discussed in advance. And then afterwards, we're going to have a Q&A session because I think the best part usually is when the audience gets involved and asks what they want to hear about. So that'll be the latter part of the discussion. And give me 1 second. Let me pull up my slides. Okay, so one thing is I am, last time I was moderator, this time I'm going to talk about a few topics myself, but of course the main panelists remain Catherine, Ketal, and Mark. Our topics tonight, 4 core topics: global content strategy, international product management, localization processes, and startup versus establishment. We're going to talk about our experiences of working in a larger company versus at a smaller company. So let's get started with global content strategy. We're going to start off with our first question. Should startups go global, and if so, when? I'm going to turn this over to Catherine.
Sure. So should startups go global and when? I mean, I think we as a group actually talked for a while in preparation over the last couple of weeks about what is a startup. And when I think about a startup, I think about a company that has really finite resources, that has a long-term vision, but hasn't yet proved enough traction to then fund the long-term vision through people and through processes and through scale. So I think that's why we often think about startups being, sub 50 people. It's really something nascent that people are coding and trying to scale really quickly, certainly in the internet space. So when you think about if we all agreed with that definition, and I think there are lots of us who have different definitions, but if we just assume that definition, startups going global doesn't really make sense from my perspective, from a phase perspective. I think that once startups move into scale, they have gone through a couple of rounds of funding. They have resources that they're able to provide for cross-functional stability within a company. You start to have mature company feel, and you also have a proven model of something, whether that's you have a lot of users of a product that you've built, or you have revenues if your product is more enterprise driven. Then that's when you start to think about global and at least market expansion to help perpetuate the goodness that you've created in at least one market. I think the last thing before I invite others on the stage to talk a little bit about their perspective on that, is the only other trade-off there is how hard is it going to be once you and a team, once startup is sort of tipping into a viable business and you can see out at least 2 to 3 years in funding and in scale, then how big is the opportunity in other markets, and how hard is that going to be? I have a depth of experience in Japan. I've lived there for 6 years in total, and I've worked on 7 businesses in Japan. And often a US-based company starts to think about their Japan strategy really early because it's hard and it takes a lot of time. So even as a small company, once you get that tipping point, you feel that tipping point as a company, there are markets that you start to think about for expansion because it will take a long time even in their own runways.
Thank you, Catherine. And thank you for defining. One thing I forgot to do in the beginning is what are startups? So this is a question we got last time. How do you define a startup? And I think Catherine has done a fabulous job of defining. In line with this definition, I should mention none of us actually work at true startups anymore, or they're not true startups anymore at this point. So probably a more proper title for this discussion would be localization at small enterprises, small to medium-sized enterprises. And then, Mark, would you like to contribute to the global content strategy?
Sure. So just to add to a little bit of what Catherine said, I think a lot of people I speak to have startups are looking to kind of, go global or have a vision for a startup. For the most part, we do envisage as being global, unless you're in a product or service which is market specific. In the long term, it is something that you could see being taken to a market, expanding to new languages, supporting people from different countries and abiding by their laws, hopefully. I think, so the big question really is when, and I think that's one of the challenges which small companies face. Knowing that their kind of product has been proven enough from the outset that they actually think, okay, well now we can start expending resources into pushing this into another market. I think one of the, depending on the product or service which is you're offering, one of the key factors here is, has there actually been an uptake in the use of your product overseas? So, one product which was very lucky with this, which I worked on, was Flickr, because of its kind of, its photography, it's a universal kind of service or product that its client base that it can reach. We were able to kind of look at different markets and sort of look at IP traffic and see where traffic is coming from. And then you've almost got a business case baked when we're just seeing a lot of your traffic come from different countries. It kind of justifies going into that market and putting more investment there. I think that's kind of, that's one of the more fortunate ways of deciding when to go into a market. But the other way would actually be to make a concerted effort. So I think another example I'd probably bring with using Japan as an example, which Catherine just mentioned, is an interesting market. That's one where at Ask.com, we've really had to adjust our business models to go into that market because it's not one that, where you would literally pick up the service you've got when it's a search engine, without actually focusing your business to that market. So that adds a whole layer of extra effort and extra kind of requirements in order to do that. So I think it's, the nature of the actual startup of the business itself is a key in terms of deciding when a startup should actually go global.
If I can just add something, I think this is, I totally agree with what you guys mentioned. One thing I just want to mention is that a lot of really true startups, like very small companies, tend to confuse going global with translating the apps that you've made, basically. And I was actually shocked when WhatsApp was acquired by Facebook because I'm not cool, but I had never heard of it before. And okay, I'll download it and look at it. Oh, it's localized in French. Okay, and a whole bunch of other languages. I had no idea. And I think that tends to happen a lot. You might have 20 people in the company, but because the access to translation resources, localization resources through regular vendors, but also a lot of the cloud-based companies that you see, like Gengo and people like that, make it very accessible for people who have no experience in localization to just go ahead and get the app translated. They don't worry about stuff like internationalization or things like that, and that's, I think, the idea that a lot of startups have behind going global, not necessarily thinking about what it truly means and what support you have to provide, and have you thought about the market and what your users really want and all that. It's in Japanese. There you go.
I think that's all, that really is, explains a lot towards the components of a kind of global strategy as well, whether it is something you can just take a US product and just put it into a different market, or do you have to consider the other components? Do you have to consider localized customer care, local payment systems, for example? Are you fully localized as a startup if people can pay in US dollars? Or, are you only fully localized when you actually have local payments in place? And you're right, I think that's a consideration of how far a company wants to go in terms of getting fully localized.
Thank you, Mark. That actually leads me to my next question. What other components are part of going global, other than just getting your app translated or your website? Catherine, do you want to take that?
Sure, I'll pick it up. So I can speak from my experience. Certainly through the LinkedIn experience, we took a tack where the product leads were really looking after growth, and growth was agnostic, at least from a locality. I mean, it was global growth from the very beginning. So the product was being built to scale around the world, and certainly translation, I think, aids that, accelerates scale, reach. But the fascinating part, what I really took away from my LinkedIn experience was I think that the product team did a really good job of not administering to local markets from an early stage, because what they were really trying to do was stay focused on what were the scaling metrics, what was the scaling product at its core, without having to take up engineering resources and so forth to create different types of a product experience to suit local markets. So, really creating a globally scaling general product experience that works for nearly everyone around the world. And once you see that, then layering in the calculus of if we're seeing acceleration in certain pockets of the world, and I think that Mark made a really good point of, you can get wonderful data back from once you have translated and made available in local languages, users around the world and their uptake, their natural organic uptake. Where are the pockets of the world where all of a sudden your product has an incredible fit? That can be surprising, it's delightful, it's exciting. What are the pockets of the world where it's not working? And they're probably, in our case, we had a handful of very important markets from an economic perspective, or even going back to the mission and the vision of the company, what we were trying to extend to the world's users, the countries where there was some drag, it was highly appropriate from our perspective that LinkedIn be successful in its markets. So then you start to layer in really measured funding of things like consumer marketing. I think of consumer marketing as gas on the fire of accelerating user growth. So what are your decentralized strategies for that? How are you going to make your marketing resources ever more local? Because I think obviously the local knowledge of what users want on the ground is going to be far more superior than a bunch of people in a headquarters trying to administer that globally. And then I think the rest of it, ultimately if you're selling, when do you put a sales team on the ground? From a strategic perspective, all of us at the end of the day are looking for revenue streams. And once you have a successful revenue stream, at least my perspective has only so far been US-based companies, so US-based companies going global. Once the US-based headquarters has proven revenue, where else can that revenue be attractive worldwide? So growing sales team is a highly, highly local process. I think the only company that comes to mind that did regional sales successfully out of places like Dublin to serve Europe is Google. Online sales model where you could put a bunch of local speakers in one location, but the rest of it tends to be really boots on the street, people who represent the customers in the market. So building up, your actual offices more often than not tends to be a sales exercise when you have confidence about being able to go out and meet customers and get revenue out of the market. So that's sort of my framework.
I agree with that. I think our experience here at Box is that we support a whole bunch of languages, but in terms of really supporting the global effort, on site, we have a much more limited list of locales, and we officially launched in Europe a couple of years ago, and for us that meant having presence on the ground and having salespeople and support people, customer service, sales engineers that really meet with the customers and anticipate the needs and also speak to them about solving the issues and grow an account and this kind of thing. We don't have that for all the languages we support. So for instance, we support Brazilian Portuguese, but we don't have anybody in Brazil. So that you're right, and this is going back to the getting the product translated or localized is one thing, but really supporting the global effort on the ground is a different thing, really. And it's a lot more time consuming, and it's a greater scale as well of and expensive. You're correct, yes.
I think I'm looking at it from an angle more on the content side as well, where it's been, the content has been the main kind of key to expanding into a new market, less so needing kind of sales teams and just kind of where can you get this content from? Is it something that you can syndicate? A lot of my experience is with kind of community of users, so how are you actually going to get user-generated content for your product, without having a big marketing campaign first? It's great, if you have got, that's why I think having this kind of foothold or reputation of the product is great, but you need something to kind of, you may need some outgoing, some expenditure in initial kind of buying of content to just kickstart the business into that market.
Yeah, it depends on the product that you're selling. If it's something like Yahoo News, obviously you need to tailor it. There's no way that you can just have US, content. And I think for marketing as well, this is something that needs to be, really tailored. If it's a product, our products at Box, it's pretty much one product. There is some work to do to make sure that it is usable by all the users globally, but it is one product. Yeah.
Whereas Yahoo Answers, for example, you need people, you need a community of users. Without that, you don't have a product. It's based on SEO. It needs somebody to create the content before you can actually grow the product further. So, what level of investment do you want to put into it? From there, can you build content from elsewhere? So.
Thanks, guys. And one thing to also mention is legal issues. So can you even go in that country? Do they require you to have a server on the ground? Is your product legal there? Airbnb is no longer legal in the state of New York. I mean, those are things you have to think about up front before you even bother localizing. So that's one thing. One other thing we might also mention later, some other components, of course, the customer service team. Do you need a customer service team on the email chat support? Do you need phone support? What are your customers expecting? If they are expecting this, of course, you're going to need to train those folks, and they're going to need to know about your company. You might have to fly out there and train them. So some of the other issues that come up. One thing I can say for life career, a big consideration of how we plan to go to other countries is, I think Mark mentioned, as Mark mentioned, is basically searches on how many keyword hits would we get for things related to our product, and general population, human development index, and how expensive is translation. Of course, ESLA is a lot cheaper than Japanese. So those are all things that get factored in. And with that, I'd like to transition to international product management. And one of the first things I'd like to pose is, how do you measure risk and reward when deciding which markets to explore? What is the matrix of opportunity? Would you like to start, Mark?
Sure, yeah. So, I think one of the main things you need to consider is, what's the revenue opportunity versus the level of effort of going into a market. This is something you can kind of visualize quite easily in terms of, kind of charting where you'd be able to compare both in the same kind of chart. A lot of detail would go into what is involved in this level of effort. Okay, for example, what's the language engineering that would be required if you have a product that's already in English? Generally, the level of effort to push that into Australia or UK from the US is considerably easier than putting it into the Middle East, where you've not only got to deal with a different language, different culture, but also a completely different site design due to the language, BiDi, for example. So these would kind of add up, involved to the level of effort. Obviously, for some, it's still weighed against the actual size of the revenue potential that you have there. Other considerations, I think, would be kind of, whether you have potential partners, and back to the syndicated content opportunity, which I mentioned earlier. If you're in the content business, what's your access to, what is your, basically like the bread and butter, the basic kind of input you need to make this product a success. How easy is it to get that in certain markets? And then obviously you need to add on the customer support issues and all of the other elements which we just mentioned there. So, Catherine, I know you've got some more thoughts in terms of the risk and reward.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. So, I often start, it's very simple, but the matrix is very effective, of how big is the opportunity and how hard is it going to be. And I think it's what Mark said, where he was talking about revenue and the level of effort. I think, how big can be defined in a number of ways. So if you just start there, how big when I was at LinkedIn was, you think back to the mission of that company, and it's connecting all of the world's professionals to make them successful, economically successful. So there are multiple variables in that when you think about how big is that market worldwide. There's population, obviously there's segments of population, so how many university students, if you're thinking about lifetime value of a LinkedIn user. How GDP of those specific countries, obviously economic opportunity is a big part of that. So, and then also if you have revenue traction, looking at total addressable markets of the revenue lines that you currently have or you foresee having. So all of that and how big can actually make, the bubbles that end up in that chart, it's not necessarily straightforward. It can get a bit complex. They compete against each other. And then, one of the other things that I loved about the science of product and talking about international product, again, international product at LinkedIn, and I work at OpenTable, but I'm relatively new at OpenTable, so I'm relying more on my LinkedIn experience for this conversation. LinkedIn's product team was really a growth team and remains a growth team. And how hard was getting back to what I had previously mentioned about, where do you see pockets of organic growth? And one of my favorite sayings that came from the guy that led growth at LinkedIn for a long time, he was like, all I want to do is roll rocks downhill. I don't want to have to do anything hard. So we'll be in markets where the product takes off in its most general form. And that actually gives you a lot of, if you've built a really resonating product, you have a lot of market opportunities on the how easy will it be, where is it already gaining traction, and ultimately, big market and easy to do is where you want to play first. And then ultimately, big markets that are going to take a while is where you might want to invest second, only because patience and amount of money is going to be really necessary to go after big markets. And many of my roles, those big markets have been over in Asia. So, how big and how hard can ultimately be a really simple exercise to start, but gets really complicated when you start to look at your desirable markets from a user base or a revenue size, and then are those markets actually resonating with your product today? Or are you going to have to do more to then invest in an international product team? And that's usually what happens next, is for really big markets or really important markets for your long-term trajectory, what are you going to have to do to shore up the product experience in those big markets that you want to capture through sometimes local or just an individual product team dedicated to that country?
Thank you, Catherine, and thank you for mentioning dedicated product managers for international. So one question is, of course, do most startups have a dedicated international product manager? And what do they do? I think we can all speak to this. What do you have input on this?
So do we have an international product manager? No. Well, yes and no. There's nobody who has that title, if you want. There's a lot of people who are involved in this issue. And I think the minute you are part of an international team within the company, then usually people will come to you with questions. There's a lot of people here who are part of the Global Alliance team that are involved in this kind of decision, like which market to go next and this kind of thing. My role is more on the, I'm going to say technical in a very loose way, but on the product side. And I have some great engineers who are supporting this really on the product side. One of them is there. And making the product available for everybody and internationalized properly. So that's my part of the product management. And also, when we have our effort on the marketing side, looking at, is this part relevant to this market? If you have a page that is talking about benefits for jobs in Silicon Valley, who gives a damn if it's in French or Japanese, because it's irrelevant. And this kind of thing, which people don't necessarily think about. So in this kind of configuration of smaller company, and certainly on the growth, but going international, quickly and the best way we can, and you involve everybody you can. You don't compartment too much. Because anybody who can be useful to your efforts, then you will ask for their opinion, really.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think, certainly as an international product manager in a small company, you do wear many hats. It's not, not always just around the product. It tends to be more, I found especially working for US companies, it tends to be anything outside the US. It's just, okay, that's for you to deal with. So it could be product issues, and then working on the product side to actually, to get these resolved either through design teams or through getting engineering resources to work, work closely to get the product kind of updated to support, to be kind of global ready. Or it can also be, if you're going through a big expansion phase, looking at identifying new markets to go into, finding partners in there, so some kind of level of business development as well. A lot of companies I do find, do tend to be kind of thin on the ground and have a lot of overlap with localization as being a big aspect of the international product management role. And I think another slant one that I've come across a lot is around the internationalization product manager role, which I know we've discussed between ourselves. which seems to be much more of an engineering kind of function than a general kind of an international BDM role.
Thank you. Catherine, do you?
I think Patel and Mark covered it pretty well. The only thing that I would add is, at OpenTable we have crested. OpenTable's been around for enough time, but we have important markets where we've been operational. So we're outside of the US, we have 5 other countries that we're operating in. And we've been in those markets for a while, so we actually know a lot about, with a lot of data about how users have been using our products in local markets. I use that to say ex-US, so outside of the US. So which of our geos need more shoring up? And so we do have some, and those are recent investments, very much a phase 2 of being a global company. What markets are we going to put much more effort into via the product to reach users in those markets? But even those roles, I think, are different from the product team that serves our global product, in that, similar to Mark's point, they also they wear a marketing hat. They also sometimes, it's mainly marketing. So the language, the tone, the experience, the content, the customer support. So the international product manager, I do believe, has often a highly cross-functional role representing their local market that they're looking after.
Thank you. And actually, Last Career just hired its very first international product manager. I was part of that process. And the way that it's basically treated there is they're required to have the same kind of experience as an American product manager, hopefully with somewhat of a localization background, and hopefully somewhat with an international business background. But in some businesses, they're just told, well, you're going to be in charge of FIGS now, APAC, what have you, and you're going to have to do the research and write those requirements out. So the way that I see the role for us is basically the same as an American product manager for the domestic market, but just duplicate the exact same thing for other countries. And also work closely with me, with localization, with Paul and I, to help them research requirements and so on. One interesting question that came up for us is, how do startups use testing as a strategy to figure out what markets to go into? So I know a number of companies have used crowdsourcing QA also to figure out what markets they might want to go into. I think Google, Facebook, and Twitter have all done this. It's a very interesting strategy. Mark or Catherine, would you like to speak to this?
Mine's sort of short, so I'll go first. I think the good news is, if you're building products on the web or on mobile, you have immediate data every day about how your product is being used worldwide in an organic sense. Who's picking it up? The best tool that we have for this today is app downloads. So who of IP addresses, where are apps being downloaded, or where are people trying to open up your app in other parts of the world? Sometimes I get really fun and surprising information about that does fortify an expansion strategy on who's trying to access OpenTable. And so that kind of data can be great for looking at certainly the how easy to how hard would it be to get into a new market. We use a lot of consumer data that way. So.
Yeah, just adding to that, I think I'm lucky I've worked in tech and internet consumer products for a while, so it's kind of, you can get into a market quick, you can get out of a market quick if it's not working, you do get information quickly. I think this kind of market validation is essential for going into any new market. From a product side, you need to decide what's your minimal viable product to actually test to get kind of sense of whether it's worth investing more or going into it deeper. I think Ask.com has got a great model for doing this, where as it's kind of search results based, we're able to kind of have a very basic MVP that we would set up in different markets, acquire traffic through the SEM method, and actually see if we've got enough of a revenue stream to kind of justify investing more into that market at that stage. And I think we've seen a lot of other companies do that. Also, international companies moving into the US, such as Alibaba, even Rakuten, who are trying to get into a different market. They're using a similar kind of validation strategy, where they're using traffic acquisition to come to their sites to try and build. To test the water, see is it worth us expending more resources to develop a product in that market? Is there a revenue stream there? I think, that's...
Okay, thank you.
I'll just add one thing. For us, of course, traffic is important as well, but because we're an enterprise company, we look also at, it's only part of the story. So, we need to see, are there companies out there, large companies who are willing to use our products? So we will look at, things like, how used the cloud is in a particular market. People are scared of the cloud. There's security concerns. Generally, whether or not they're justified, this is the kind of thing that we have to work with. And our sales guys, on the ground, they do and go and talk to a lot of customers. So you may have some large deals that are signed in some areas where you think, well, that might not be the primary market for us. But it's a slightly different approach that we have from that standpoint.
Okay, thank you. We only have a few minutes left. We're only about halfway through, so we have to speed up a little bit more. Thank you, guys. It's been wonderful. Next, we're going to talk about the localization processes. So, Patel, one thing that we've discussed: do you have a dedicated internationalization product manager or internationalization engineering team? What has been your experience?
So when I started at Box, I was the only localization person, and strictly speaking, I am still the only localization person. But now I am very lucky because I have a team of engineers working with me, and they are working on the internationalization issues. So making our product better and fixing the issues we have and anticipating, further issues. So from that standpoint, that's been awesome, and I'm doing the product management of this team and working closely with them. But from a localization standpoint, strictly speaking, I'm the only person doing that. So I'm doing product management, project management and localizability of the products, working with the other product managers to see what's coming, what are the potential issues we're going to have, working with all the different teams. I am technically part of the product team, but I work with all the teams within Box. I also work with with our team in Europe, our team in Japan, and to make sure that we get support their needs in terms of localization, and make sure that they get, and when they meet customers that say, well, that doesn't work in my language, what's going on, and we go and try and fix it, and so you pretty much have to do everything, and we might talk later about what's the difference between a startup and a big company. Where in a big company you'll have a team. I have a team, and that team is great at fixing the technical problems, but everything else needs to be done by me, pretty much, and it's done the best way you can, because that's all you can do. So you don't have the support of saying, well, that I'm going to give to my project manager because that's you. So you just do that, and it's very important that you can work with everyone as well, because people will come to you if you have localization in your job title. That's it. You're the person who's going to fix that. So, and it's awesome. In a lot of different ways, it's awesome, but it's a lot of stress too. So.
Absolutely. And I share that, we don't have a dedicated internationalization team. Pretty much nobody at Lifegear had heard of internationalization or pseudo-localization before, so pretty much had to educate them and work with them through that. And the other thing also to mention is, even marketing folks need to be involved with this. So for example, social security numbers don't exist outside of this country. There might be other formats, it might be a combination of letters and numbers. And so actually every team in the company probably has something to do with internationalization, whether they realize it or not. And that actually leads us to our sorry.
I just had one thing to say about that. I brought up at the very beginning about when do you layer in international product and so forth. And I do think that when we're building companies that ultimately we want them to be global, part of the benefit of not segmenting out international engineering teams takes a lot of talent, I think, to be able to be somebody who can localize and make that available to a lot of cross-functional teams. It's, you know, you have to wear a lot of hats, you have to have a lot of expertise. But the best part of that from an engineering perspective is where you start to fragment out the engineers and you start to be building, customizing your site for different parts of the world, you actually then end up sacrificing scale, I think. So the role that you're playing, I've seen, has been so educational for engineers to be able to constantly be thinking about how do I continue to generalize this product so that we can account for things like, you know, in Japan, first name, last name is reversed, and so how can we make a product that can also just adapt for that? That's not just Japan, actually. CJK has some of that characteristic. So anyway, it's a hard thing to do because you don't have an independent team working alongside, but the benefit to the organization is that the entire engineering population, I think, gets educated about how to be global.
Yeah, but you have to do it all the time. It's, you know, you have to repeat yourself constantly. And it's great, and people are very receptive, but, you know, they either think that they know, or they remember, but they don't remember. So you just have to keep at it. You keep at it, you keep at it, and you shouldn't be discouraged because, I mean, certainly as Box has been really awesome because people have been really, really keen on improving on that side. But, you know, everybody has got a full plate. And they think they've finished, oh no, there's another 15 languages to think about. Oh no, what do you mean? So yeah, it's you constantly have to keep at it, which is a challenge.
Definitely, and I mean, there's things that engineers have never thought about. How do you sort a database in CCJK? They've never thought about this, right. So basically, or, you know, different input methods editors for Chinese, for example. So these are just things that you have to educate and work with them. Especially if you don't have technical knowledge, which I don't. So I basically, I know what to check for, I know when it's not looking right, but I'm relying on them also to help me figure it out. So it's really a team effort. And then that brings me to the next question. What is the role of a localization manager in a small company? We've talked about this a lot tonight already. One thing I'd like to add to that, so one thing that I've seen as my role, as the first and only localization manager at Life Career, has been to really evangelize localization, really educate everybody about what it is, to work with every single team in the organization, and basically present to them, I'm here to help you, let's work together, let's make this happen, educate me about what you do. I had never heard of search engine marketing before starting a Life Career. I had to learn all about it and then learn how to do this in other countries. So it's really a collaborative effort. And that's actually one of the things I love most about this field and about my job, is that I get to learn about things I've never thought about before. I actually didn't know much about product management or SEM or SEO. So I think that's just really one of the beauties of the job. Tom?
Yeah, that's pretty much the same thing. I mean, I'd never done product management before, up to like, 4 months ago. And okay, I'll try it, and it's working okay, I think. So you just have to, you know, to go and do it, and that's what happens in a small organization. You know, if you go and work for Google or Apple, you know, you won't have that. You will have a lot of support. You will have a team. You will have people who have processes in place, and probably some improvement that needs to be done here and there. But there is already something that exists. The great thing about an organization like this one is that you can write the book. You really try to make it your own and make it as good as you can. But you do have to learn a lot of stuff, and sometimes it's a little bit daunting, but you know, it works out in the end.
Yep, that's the exciting thing. I have a few more questions related to localization processes, but I do want to get to the Q&A section soon. So I'll just share with you some of the things that we thought about, and if you'd like to ask those during Q&A, then we can discuss them then. So one of the larger topics was localization and agile. Should localization be parallel to the development process? What kind of model would you want to have? In-house language specialist? Do you hire an LSP? Is there a potential for a startup that's growing to afford such hiring? Should a localization manager be development or linguistics oriented? So how do translators feel about working with Agile? Do the localization managers need to be part of all sprint planning sessions? So these are some of the things we've discussed, but in the interest of time, I'm going to move on to the next topic, And if you'd like to hear about those topics, please ask about them in Q&A. So,
And are we going to do a Q&A now, or?
no, we're going to talk about startup versus establishment.
Okay, all right, sorry.
No worries, no worries. So just to finish up, next we're going to talk about startup versus establishment. And so as I mentioned in the beginning, the one thing we all have in common is that we come from larger companies and have moved to smaller companies. And as we all know, they all have their pros and cons. So just, I think we could just all share our experiences of the pros and cons. Mark?
Yeah, literally a continuation of just what Catal was saying, and that you don't have as many people to do as many jobs as you do in a large organization. You know, you don't have dedicated internationalization engineers. It would be great if you did, but no, you kind of got to sometimes I even find myself doing research for engineers in terms of how to actually do internationalization tasks and code. A lot of it didn't make a lot of sense to me, but I'd find it and then send it to them and say, hey, this is what we need you to do. Do you understand it? You know, 'cause hopefully you also, if you're in a position where you've got engineers who are proactive or kind of want to learn about that, which I've been found that has happened quite often, engineers can be kind of open to that. But I think that's one of the big things, is that wearing many hats, not having as many resources at your disposal. However, on the plus side, I feel that everybody is also pushing in the same direction. I know some of the people here from Yahoo I worked with kind of appreciate, some of the kind of struggles we had in terms of ensuring that all the products are kind of localized to the same market, so that you don't just have a mixed bag of Yahoo Mail, for example, in this language, Yahoo Answers in that language. So you're all on the same page. You know, usually from the CEO down, which markets you want to go into. Quite often you've helped decide on which markets to go into and provide a business case for that. But there's some agreement there. You're not meant fighting internal politics to actually get there. And I think that's one of the really big kind of refreshing changes I've found of moving to a much smaller company.
Yeah, I'll have to second that. I mean, on top of that, I would say easy access to the decision makers and the top decision makers, CEO and C-level people generally. You can, our CEO sits 2 desks behind me, and if I need to, I can go and speak to him. He is, he meets with the teams regularly. He's involved. I mean, he's on some stuff. What do you mean that button is here? I don't want it here. It's not the right color. It's not the right font. Aaron is very, very peculiar about a lot of, very picky about this kind of stuff. But we have easy access to a lot of the high-level people. And as Mark said, everybody's pushing in the right direction, in the same direction anyway. And that makes it much easier. You don't have to worry about that. There's a lot of other stuff you need to worry about that you don't need to worry in large organization. Like automation or stuff like that. But at least you get the support from the team around you.
I was sitting here listening, and all of a sudden the image of surfing versus taking a cruise came to mind. And what I mean by that is, surfing is so much fun because you can choose the big waves that you want to take. But when you crash, getting back to shore, you're stranded, and it's a lot of effort when you fail. When you're on a cruise, everything is extremely comfortable, and there's a lot at your fingertips. But navigating icebergs or moving really quickly to take a different direction takes a lot of time. And so the one thing that I really love about being in a larger company, having worked in much smaller startup environments, is how do you create the thrill-seeking that you can experience, in a smaller company, in an environment where you do have a lot of resources and a lot of opportunity to collaborate with people. That's such a fun exercise, and I agree. I think it's a leadership-led. It's a culture. It's a culture built by people who manage the company and believe that innovation comes from staying sort of nimble and looking for big, scary challenges to go out and serve.
Thank you. So as folks have mentioned, you have a lot more security in larger companies. Processes are usually set up. There's more comfort that you know exactly that what you're doing is right, and you know when to stop, you know when you've done it well. At my job, I never know if I've done enough. I'm never sure. I always think I forgot something, I didn't do something right, how can I do this better? Because you have no playbook, you write your own playbook. So one of the first things I did when I started is to write a roadmap. Did I do this right? I have no idea. I sure hope so. But, nobody's there to really manage me and tell me, are you doing this right? My boss didn't know what localization was. So in a way, I don't have anybody to learn from but myself and from internal stakeholders about non-localization related topics. So it's really just, I wouldn't say it's for folks that like a lot of security, it might not be the right job. But if you do like learning and you like being on your own and you're kind of a self-starter, I think it's a fantastic opportunity. One of the downsides can be that localization doesn't always have executive support, and it is often the first thing to get cut once it's already been established when funding is lost. I've been very fortunate that our CEO has thought about this early on, has been pushing it for a long time. So I've always had excellent support, but I also count myself very lucky because I know a lot of startups, localization managers do not have this kind of support. So that's my 2 cents. And then let's move to the Q&A section, I think. So folks, if you have questions, if you could come up to the microphone and ask. So some of the questions that were suggested earlier that we haven't gotten to, that we didn't have a chance to get to, is, for example, should localization be parallel to the development process? Should we hire an in-house linguist or several, or would we hire an LSP? Localization means agile. That's another big topic. So is anybody interested in hearing about these topics or has another idea?
Agile process and translation.
Okay. Okay, great.
See, and because nobody wants to walk up to the microphone, I will walk it over to you.
Thank you, Joe.
So we are building this tool in my company, and we are trying to decide if we need to finish the product first and then do the localization. But we are trying to move fast, so I want to know about the agile, how you combine agile process development with localization.
Okay, thank you.
You do the best you can. So, sorry, that's probably not the answer you want, but when you are, I don't know which size your company is and what resources you have, but in a smaller organization, even so for us, for our main product, our web app, we have daily releases. We are nowhere near that on the localization. We are once a week, which means that we can be up to 10 days behind the English, which is not good enough, and we want to change that. You cannot change that if you don't have automation in place. That takes time, that takes resources, and there are more pressing issues to sort. So we want to do all this, but this is the kind of stuff that you have to do. You have to set a goal and just be happy with that goal for the time that the foreseeable future. At some point, you can do probably better. But the ideal solution, you want to be in a situation where you have automation in place and you can get your strings, and in a few hours you can get them localized and sent out, and you have maybe a vendor that does that, or you have in-house people, depending on your resources. We're nowhere near that, and a lot of companies, I think, are nowhere near that, so.
Yeah, I think my question was more about if it's worth the effort to build your own tools in-house for automation and translation and stuff like that, or it's better to just outsource everything.
So ask me again in a month's time, and we're about to start that investigation. I don't know. My gut feeling is that if you want to be quick, buying off the shelf might be a better solution, but it really depends on your circumstance and how it would work and how your integration is going to work. And also, do you have people who can do this? And how long is it going to take? If they're not specialized in that field, is it going to take them 6 months to put something together? Can you afford to wait 6 months? It depends. So it really varies. We are about to start that investigation and deep dive into that subject really.
And do you think you can automate the quality process? Because let's say that I outsource the localization, but then I need to check that actually it's what we wanted from the product perspective.
So you mean to automate the process, the flow by which you check, or?
Yeah. Because for example, right now in my company, most of the quality assurance process is done manually. So a linguist actually sits down and read the whole document or pages or whatever. So is there a way to automate that?
Well, I mean, if you're talking about QA, there are definitely some automation that can be put in place. Again, we don't have it, but you know, it does exist in a larger company. And Marina, you're probably more aware of that than I am. But you know, again, you have. I really feel that you have to set a goal that you're happy with for the time being, and see what you can achieve. Don't try and achieve something that is completely unreachable. You know, you say, okay, right now, next month, I'm going to have automation, I'm going to have all my language checked automatically, and it's going to be on a loop, and it's going to be beautiful, I'm going to have a dashboard. No, it's not going to work that way. What can you do? And if it means that it's manual for now, then go with that. I think it's better than nothing. You know, a lot of the really small startups, they have nothing like that. So right now, I've learned that, you know, I do what I can, and then I'll improve that little by little, but you have, I think it's better to have a process in place that works, that is small and limited, but works well, and actually gives you results, and then try to do too much and it's completely irrelevant and doesn't make any sense. That's my opinion.
And I'm not sure if this answers your question, but of course there's different steps of QA. If you're talking about the QA process that happens in TEP, yes, of course you can automate the functional stuff to some extent. You can run scripts to see if, you know, the number 3 is in the source, is it also in the target? Are they named placeholder still there? Absolutely, you can automate that, of course. For browser stuff, Selenium, I mean, there's software out there. Most engineers are able to build something also. One thing that we do though, that I actually like that we do it manually, is that we actually, our linguistic testing is closely tied to functional. So as our LSP goes through and does the functional testing, this is also how they do linguistic testing. So we don't tell them exactly what to test for, but we say, okay, this is your end-to-end testing process. Every screen, every button you're touching, you're not only going to functionally QA, you're also going to do linguistic QA at the same time. So we basically roll it into one. So that's one way to do it.
Hi. I've noticed that you haven't really talked about Unicode, and having been part of the Unicode team, I'm just pretty focused on that. But I remember that in my own experience, and I think I see it's still happening now, that people don't think about that at all. They think about, well, maybe I need to use some new fonts. But if they don't design from the beginning with Unicode, then they have to undo a lot of work before they can start to internationalize. And I'm wondering, is that just kind of automatic these days, or is that something that should be focused on?
I don't know. When I came in at Box, it was already in place. Unicode, thank God, was there. This doesn't mean Jean agrees partially with this statement. I think overall it was okay, but there's a lot of stuff that still need to be, fixed. Was it built in Unicode? Yes, but with some caveat. Put it that way.
I think I'm pretty similar to that. Unicode sort of seems pretty synonymous now with engineers use Unicode. I think maybe colleges have been doing a good kind of education in bringing Unicode to just becoming standard. It's not something I've come across as a big issue in recent years. Going back a few years, it was a big challenge when we're kind of globalizing some older code bases, but now it's not something that comes to the forefront.
Great. So I think there are a lot of tools on the Unicode website, and there are fonts there that a lot of people don't need to know about, that just makes the whole process easier if they are aware of it. And it doesn't mean there aren't going to be new challenges every day. Thank you.
Okay, we got somebody here, but I did want to mention, okay, here and then here, and I think the dog had something to say. But, those of you who started with Meetup with us, you know that they founded their company in 2004, and in about 2010 they realized half their web pages were UTF-8, half were not. Most of the back-end databases were not. Unicode stuff would seem to be working on one page, you go into the database, come out, it was all decimal numbered Unicode, and it was a mess. And then they really had to, take a holiday weekend and try to change everything all at once, which is the same as trying to move an airport in one day. And not everything worked, but it came off pretty well considering. I was actually pretty impressed. So, and I think you see that more with companies that started like in 2004. And if you look at the Unicode adoption rate, you look now, this company that starts now might be better off, but I have dealt with some people that don't want to anyway. I was telling you about that before I went in. Yeah.
Hi everybody, my name is Cooney and I work for a branding agency called B-Trax, and we help companies that are successful in one market. We help them translate their brand experience in one market by helping them bring their user experience from one market to another. And I had a question that I wanted to ask the people, particularly those on the stage. You guys really are the success stories of localization, but maybe you can share with us about like some of the horror stories that you've heard throughout the course of your career. Maybe not the companies that you work for necessarily, but maybe firsthand that you heard from maybe the competitions that have potentially failed at their attempts in localizing and trying to enter the other markets that they're trying to go. So thanks.
I'll go quickly because unfortunately, then I need to exit the stage, so it'll just be a neat way to do that. I think horror stories, certainly. I think what sometimes is horrible or really devastating is just when you're working really hard and you have a global vision and you believe that, and especially you have a product that works in multiple markets, and for some reason in a particular market that really matters to you, it just doesn't lift. You just can't get users to adopt it. There are cultural challenges. There are, you go back and you look at the product and maybe you've just done a terrible job at being honest about how well you've localized it, how well it sort of resonates with users. Then you can't fund it. There's challenges inside the organization about prioritizing a certain market over then, you've got global scale and, where it's working in a generic sense globally versus really shoring up one particular market. Those can be really tough fights to go and wage inside a company. So I think rather than, the typical horror stories that you hear of sometimes, and I think this was definitely true maybe 15 years ago, of brands going into markets and not having researched their local brand name and have it come out and be something, absolutely terrible in a local language. I do think that globally as businesses, we've advanced, at least from my perspective, beyond that stage of globalization. But what can be really devastating inside a global company is then to see a market, one particular market that you feel passionate about or can even, originally have been really high up in a really big opportunity for the company to go after, have it be sacrificed for the greater good of continued global scale. That's my experience with it.
Okay. And thank you, Catherine. Thanks so much for coming. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
I think one of the most shocking things I've come across in terms of localization has been the attitudes towards it. Seriously, when building a new product at Yahoo, I was asked, well, English is a global business language, why do we need any other languages? I think, why do you argue with something like that? So getting past some of those kind of attitudes, and I think one of the other kind of worst experiences I've had has been when kind of internationalism has been or localization has been seen as a feature, and so it's not included in every release. When you're not on an agile framework, so you're looking at kind of monthly releases where you've got to push to actually get language updates into that release. So, you're releasing stuff with broken strings, mojibaki, you're releasing with, I've seen stuff with, completely incorrect strings that are very wrong, and it's taken over 6 months to fix. In the meantime, because this has been a community product, you're having, this is getting a lot of attention. It's making, Reddit, making sites like Reddit, making sites like BuzzFeed, and being laughed at for being, literally poor translations, and there's nothing that you're able to do about it because you haven't got I guess, the importance to get a language fix into a release for several months. And that's something which has happened to me on a couple of products in my time at Yahoo.
So the next speaker in San Francisco, Addison Phillips, that for many years his catchphrase has been internationalization is not a feature, it is an architecture. Next question is here, if you have more.
Hi, my question is about how do you provide context for translators? A lot of times for our company, we have a new feature or several new features coming out, and even I, as a localization manager, don't know where the strings are exactly coming from. So then I have to ask the developer, and it's something that I don't think developers really welcome. It's something that takes away from their time, and then also to provide context for the translators who are actually translating that. What are some of the strategies that you've used?
Yeah, I've got a good example, a little anecdote with that one as well. So when, again, working for Flickr, I used to literally have to translate from kind of Californian English to US English from the engineers. So to be close to them, to see the strings they were putting through, a lot of them were kind of computer game references or just very heavily kind of, Californian. Our translators were based in countries. They understood English obviously fluently, but they didn't understand a lot of cultural references. So being close, getting to know these developers and the ones who are the prime culprits for this, which is easy, you can find out quite quickly. A lot of them kind of pop culture reference, computer game references, this kind of stuff, and then literally just getting translations from them of what it means and providing an extra note next to those to kind of give the translator more context. It's a little bit time consuming, but I found it beneficial to give them it up front. Otherwise you know that it will be coming back and it wastes time. Obviously with a time delay, then you lose a day perhaps of having to answer that by email to tell them what the context is. So where possible, trying to see where they're going to have these problems, interpret it yourself, look for problems and give them notes ahead of sending it for translation.
It's a tricky one, really tricky. In some instances you can give context, like some examples that Mark has given, or if you're having a marketing page that is already built in English, you can actually give them access to it. They can see in context where it's going to look like, where the buttons are going to be. That's pretty easy. The tricky bit is that if you are on daily releases and you need to push as quickly as possible with the translation, and you have files that are sent to the translators that don't have any information, and it's a guess. So they send questions, and every week we get questions from our vendor and say, well, what does that mean? Is that a verb? Is that a noun? Where does that fit? How about the concatenation? What is going to fit in that variable? This kind of stuff. So after that, it's can you switch to a translation framework that will allow you to add information? To add information. So, for instance, our mobile apps, I'm thinking of our iOS app, the files that the engineers provide are really nicely built, and they include not only context, but also example for each of the strings, so the translators can see right away how it's going to fit, and we get very few questions or none at all. So if you can work with the engineers to get that kind of information in the files for translation, that's fantastic. Then you have tools that may provide you, I know there's tools out there on the market that for at least some source code may provide you context. I'm thinking of stuff like SmartLink, that have this feature that shows the translator what it's going to look on the page if you want when they're translating it. Then that's, that might work as well. You need to check what works for your own product. But it's a very tricky thing, and I think all the companies, small and big, are still working on this kind of stuff, really.
So I think there's two different answers. Are you sending resource files? Then yes, you have to comment in the code. You can also rename your key to make it, basically show what it is. So say we have the word send. Are you sending an email? Are you sending a payment? What are you doing? So your key could be something like send button payment. You could ask, and engineers don't like to do this. I've asked our engineers to add context. They don't like to do this. Either add it in the key, comment in the code. whatever it takes, they don't want to do it. But that's one way to do it. Probably one thing that's very important is for the translators to really familiarize themselves with your product. That's they really have to use it from A through Z, and then a lot of times when these out of context strings come, they might be able to guess where they're from. I think that's a really important first step. And then of course, as Cattell was mentioning, if you have on-screen editors for them, and they can just translate it in context, that can be very helpful.
I would say the advantage we have with cloud-based products, like we have, is that you can give your translators access to it for free. They can, and they should have access to it. They should be able to use it. They should know it inside out. Even if it means, you build this in, with your vendor. If you have a vendor, you say, okay, you guys are going to spend 10 hours on this. I want to make sure that you know your product. And it's the same with the mobile apps. They can download them for free. This kind of stuff. So that's something that certainly when I started in translation, you didn't have access to the product. 99% of the stuff I translated I never saw. I had no idea what it looked like.
And one thing to add, you also really heavily rely on on-screen QA after the fact for this. I think everybody knows you're going to miss stuff. So that's really where on-screen QA comes in also.
Thank you.
Mike?
Hi, I just wanted to ask, as a startup, as a startup, when do you decide to start a translation, for instance, to go localizing into a market? Like, I guess that the first step is you create content in English and you launch the product, you have that in English. In which phase of the product you are at do you decide to then go and localize into a market? Localize in this sense as in translating into that market.
So if you're talking about adding a particular language to your product, for us we look at return on investment pretty much. Why do we want to add this language? What deals are we expected to get out of this? What are the usage of our product in that particular locale? And if it looks like, the investment of adding a language versus making a really big deal with a large company, usually you have your answer there. So that's the kind of stuff that we look at. Sometimes we have customer asks, they say, okay, well, we're going to sign this deal with you guys, but we need that language. That's an ask, and that's a deal breaker if we don't get it. So we do it. If it's worth it, from an investment standpoint, then we do it.
And I would add that, I think most good CEOs of companies also understand that some languages are going to be successful and some are going to flop. So if you have the right expectation setting in the beginning to basically let them know, guess what, this could just not be a good investment, but sometimes you just have to try. I think that's very important also. But I think as we mentioned earlier, you look at the matrix of opportunity.
Exactly, yeah, back from matrix opportunity and just weighing up level of effort versus potential reward. That people are deciding to go into that market, and resources are a big factor within that as well.
Can I just throw another question, just in terms of when you said that it's sometimes difficult for the startups to have, or when they first cut, they would cut on localization, and sometimes you have to know how to sell that as part of the architecture and not just one feature. How do you usually sell that?
Well, so I think, I certainly feel that at Box, I think that people understand the importance of global. It's even easier when you have numbers to support that. When a good portion of your revenue comes from overseas, then it's much easier to make a case. Oh, really? You think that it's not important? Well, that many customers think otherwise. That much revenue thinks otherwise. But to be fair, you do have to make that point constantly. I've made the point very plainly several times that localization is not a feature; it's the core product, and it's really a switch, a shift in mentality that people need to have. And even with people who are very receptive and very keen on learning about this, you need to repeat it and repeat it and repeat it. And at the end of the day, the only way it's going to work is that if you make the effort. So I meet every other week with each of the product managers, and I go, okay, let's go through what you have coming. Show me the mock-ups. I go and see the designers, and I look exactly what's coming and what are the potential issues. And every single time, I spot things that they haven't thought about because because it's not their job, because they have a lot of other stuff to think about, and no, they didn't think that Russia is going to go like way above that limit on that button and stuff like that. So you have to make that investment because people won't do it, not because out of spite or because they don't care. It's just that they have too much on their plates already, and it's not part of their. It should be part of what they do too, but it's your role to do this, really.
I think, when I started a life career, localization was described as a project. And very much in the beginning I said, no, it's not a project, it's a program. And just, really, if you keep repeating the correct language, it sticks in people's heads. So I think that's where the evangelizing and education component really comes in. And, if you just stay strict on this and say, nope, this is how it is, and I'm the expert, and you're going to listen to me on this, they basically pick up on it because at the end of the day, what you're doing is helping the company have more profit. So they basically start to understand how important it is to do it all around. And as I said, keep meeting with stakeholders, keep, as Patel was saying, explaining what may or may not go right. And another fun one is to always give examples of localization gone wrong, which we know many of. So that's, those always stick in people's heads. So, fun things like the Chevy Nova didn't go on Mexico. We all know that one. So that's important.
I would say, I think you're right. When you communicate, especially with a big group, try to make it fun. Don't make it like boring and dry because they won't care. I put like screenshots and fun stuff because it sticks in people's minds, really. So yeah.
Always show fun videos of localization going on. My favorite one, and all our base belong to us.
Yes.
Okay. Only some nerds know this one.
All your race belong to us.
Thank you.
I'm good at that. Okay, who had a question over here? There you go.
I find myself kind of talking a lot about like the triangle of quality. You can get fast, cheap, good, pick two. But for a lot of our clients, we find that in their minds the content already exists, so they want it yesterday, they want it for free, and they want it flawless. So I was wondering if this is an issue for you with your stakeholders, and if you have strategies for managing those expectations.
I can. So that's actually interesting. As I was mentioning, in many startups, localization is not regarded highly from the start and not always given a big budget. I think again, it's the localization manager's job to really convince stakeholders of the importance of quality. So that's why I always start as well. We need this quality. If we don't do this, this could happen. And I think I've just been lucky that I've had receptive ears, had open ears that kind of understood quality goes above all else. The other thing is that if they don't know localization, they don't know how long it takes. So basically, they don't expect stuff to be done tomorrow. I have a guy going, well, can you get a terms of use done in 8 weeks? I said, yes, absolutely, you can. You can probably get it done in 5 days. Do I tell them this? Probably not. Probably say 2 or 3 weeks, just to be safe. But again, I think that as the only localization person at any company, you have a very unique position to set expectations from the start. Whereas at an established company that kind of knows the ropes, they know the standard metrics of turnaround times and prices, it's going to be much, much harder to push your agenda through. But if you pretty much set the right expectations with some buffer, of course, from the beginning, then I think the goal we all have as localization managers, which is to get the highest amount of quality, can be achieved. So that's been my experience.
And I think for a lot of smaller companies, a lot of products which are starting to offer in different languages, your customer base tends to be pretty forgiving as well. It's not expecting something that's kind of perfect, something that's just 100% perfect. I think it's a lot of people are just happy to have something in their languages available to them, and as a kind of starting point where they kind of there's the expectation that will be built on. So I don't think it's always kind of measured by being high quality from the outset for a lot of products, a lot of small new products in different markets.
Yeah, I would say, well, for some consumer products, probably. I think it depends on what the expectations of your consumers are, of your users are. On an enterprise product, if you're looking at languages like Japanese, there is very little, room for error. So you want to make it as good as possible, but you do have to manage the expectations, and you do have also to just work with what you're given. I mean, you know, if you just on some things you have to put your foot down, and I can think of an example where you know, we said no, that release is going to be held. We're going to resubmit because it's not good. There's a problem here. And I think, you know, if it had been a couple of years prior, it wouldn't have mattered, but it was important enough for us to hold it back. But in a lot of cases, you have to work with it. I mean, you know, maybe your mobile app, you'll do the QA on it after it's live, because there is absolutely no time to do it between the time you deliver the translated strings and the time that we submit to Apple, for instance. And these things are really set in stone, and you can't really do much about it. So are you happy with this? No. Can you live with it? Probably, if you're fairly confident that your product is in a pretty good shape already. So you just have, you know, to work with it. And I found in localization, especially people with a linguistic background, and I'm one of them, we're very, very focused on quality and like, oh, we cannot be wrong, the comma has to be in the right place. And what is the user expecting? From an enterprise standpoint, the expectation is high, but you know, you have to be able to live with it as well, and you have to be able to work with it. I mean, you know, if you're always saying no, you're never going to go anywhere. So, you know, work with what we have. The great thing about cloud as well is that your releases are, you know, there's a lot of them, so you can fix things. and maybe, you know, maybe you'll have to wait a couple of weeks for it to be fixed. If it's a huge thing, then absolutely, you should say no, it's not going to happen. Whether or not you listen, that's another issue, depends on your company. With us, it will work, but other companies, it's not, so it really depends. But sometimes, you know, live a bit, because otherwise,
Yeah, I think the problem is most of us that have been translators were perfectionists, right? We want things to be perfect. Business people don't care about perfection, they just want to decrease time to market and just get out there as quickly as possible, make as much money as possible. So I had to learn a lot about that and be okay with not having something be perfect, and you know, just have a minimum viable product, push it out, everything else gets done later if possible. But which is kind of a bitter lesson to learn for somebody who just loves language quality and really cares about it. But that's the reality, and the sooner you kind of accept it and also communicate, you know, with your product manager to understand what are the key features, what really needs to be perfect, what doesn't yet. That, I think that's really, having that dialogue open all the time is really key in that process, I think.
Hi, I have one question. Is there special for China? And then, do you guys have any ideas about this country?
Can you speak a little louder or closer to the microphone, please?
Oh yeah. My question is, how about Chinese localization? And do you have any thoughts to share? Because I'm really, really passionate about my country's language. And also I can speak Chinese, English, Japanese. Just wondering.
Yeah, I've had a couple of experiences with localizing products to China. For a lot of part, it's been not due to legal issues and legal restrictions. This has been due to the community product side I've worked on. Sort of like the nuances, we've kind of looked at going into China, and it's just posed too many problems. So, you know, the use of the data, storage of the data, where, for example, you know, if we would have to give this data up to the Chinese government for requests, and so we look to find alternatives around this, such as, you know, offering a Chinese language, but having it based under Hong Kong law or Taiwan. So obviously, you know, it's not fully localized to China in particular. One kind of different example that has been with Ask.com, where we've basically partnered with a company in China to actually go in there. A lot of this has been around just getting a license to operate under Chinese law. But you need an office to be actually based there, which there's a lot of difficulties in actually getting that set up. So we've kind of, you know, worked with other companies and kind of gone into what an alliance I would say, or a group of small companies where we're operating under the same umbrella, and so we're able to offer services there, but effectively it is a partnership due to the difficult laws. And then we've actually got somebody in market to actually deal with the government restrictions that we come across. So it's been difficult. There's a lot of reward potential there, but there's a lot of red tape, and we've certainly found that either too difficult to enter, or the only option has been through partnering. I hope that helps.
So from our standpoint, we do support Chinese, both kinds, simplified and traditional, for all our products, but we don't have an in-country presence yet, and so it hasn't been like a focus for us. We do support the languages, but I don't have much to say about it. I'm sorry.
The same here.
Actually, we cannot use Box in China, because my friends they send documents, but we cannot use.
Yeah, this is why we're not in China right now.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of the more difficult markets, and we have some stakeholders that are pushing for it, saying, my goodness, it's so huge, it's a huge potential market, let's make this happen. One challenge that we've seen is, we use Google Analytics to base a lot of our decisions off of. And we don't have anybody, Baidu doesn't have the same tools, and we don't have anybody who basically is able to use it that speaks Chinese. So that's kind of a problem. So one solution we're looking at is partnering with an outside agency that can provide this kind of service, but it's definitely not easy. And I've also heard things like, well, you need to know someone in the government, you might need to bribe somebody. I don't know if that's true, but I know it's definitely a lot more difficult than in countries that are Google-centric. Same issue when we looked at Russia on the index. It doesn't have the same kind of capabilities as Google does. So.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, just to add to that, that's one of the other challenges we've faced at Ask has been because Google doesn't have such a presence in either Japan or China, that we've had to basically, change the business model quite a bit. And it is actually Baidu that we kind of use instead of Google as a kind of search partner there. But yeah, it is essential to have somebody on the ground for the business that we're operating, which is very revenue focused.
Okay, so does anybody else have a burning question? Okay, well, thank you. I think that we should spend some time asking them questions directly instead of while they're on the stage and mill around until Cal kicks us out. How about that? Okay, thank you. Let's give a round of applause.